RF radiation testing.
Our Build America agenda includes efforts to further streamline the many regulations that stand in the way of infrastructure projects. So under my leadership, the FCC will be taking a fresh look at how the agency can use our authorities under the Communications Act, including our authorities in Section 253 and 332, to make it easier to build out internet infrastructure. We're also going to look at NEPA and environmental regulations, which for too long have held back builds, and we have a unique window of opportunity right now, particularly in light of some new Supreme Court decisions, to cut some of the red tape there as well.
This is an industry giveaway, one that the wireless industry has been pushing for years. It is essentially a corporate takeover of our public spaces, giving telecom companies the power to dictate what gets built, where it gets built, and who must live with the consequences. People deserve a voice. Cell towers can drop property values, increase fire risk, contain hazardous materials, and they emit radiation that hundreds of scientists say is not safe. The US hasn't updated its radiation limits since 1996, and a federal court told the FCC to explain how its limits protect children, but the FCC has not responded. We have in the United States limits for cell tower radiation that are 10 to 100 times more lenient than many other countries. Children and families should not be collateral damage in the race to fast-track cell towers. We need to fast-track science-driven protections, oversight, accountability, and transparency, not industry-driven federal preemption. Please join us at Environmental Health Sciences by signing the petition, contacting your state and federal legislatures through our letter writing tool, and talk to your community. Contact your officials. Ask them to submit to the FCC. We must preserve local control when it comes to cell towers, and it will take every one of us. Thank you.
So welcome to the show, Theodora Scorado. She is a leading expert in environmental health policy related to cell towers. She's co-authored several scientific papers and serves as the special expert to the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. She, as an executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, she led a landmark federal case demonstrating the inadequacy of the FCC's 1996 cell tower radiation exposure guidelines. Welcome to the show, Theodora. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here.
Now, a lot of people are going to say immediately when you bring this up to them, I know because I lived through COVID, a lot of people are going to call you a conspiracy nut, tinfoil hatter, and there's nothing wrong with cell towers and 5G or any of that. What do you say back to those people?
Well, I would say that there are hundreds of scientists that think otherwise, because this issue has actually been researched for decades. I came upon it 15 years ago, only to find scientists have been saying we have a problem that needs to be addressed, going back to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, because what happened in our country is similar to the history of tobacco or asbestos or lead. The wireless industry is very powerful, and you have a lot of studies. Some show impacts, some don't. If they are industry funded, they more often don't show effects. If they are independently funded, then they more often do show effects. And the thing that I always tell people who are skeptical, and I was so skeptical myself, is that the limits we have for what we're allowed to be exposed to. So from the air, if there's a cell tower, how much are we allowed to be exposed to? The government has laws on that, guidelines that were set in 1996, not even based on long-term impacts. And now we're in a situation, there's no regular requirement for checking what the radiation is. There's been no review by federal agencies for decades. And we're in a situation that I would call a cell tower blitz. We have the FCC wanting to remove basically the ability for cities and towns to control where these go. And there's also congressional proposals moving forward that would do similar things, stripping local control. So There's a lot. There's a lot here. It's like an onion.
So,
Actually,
I mean, it just kind of makes sense. So they have guidelines in place for the amount of what would you call it? Radiation? What would you call it?
it's non-ionizing, not the same as nuclear or atomic radiation. It's electromagnetic radiation, and so we call it RF radiation. You can call it that.
And so they already have limits in place for RF radiation, right?
Yes.
So that would mean that the government acknowledges that there's a potential harm from too much RF radiation, correct?
Yes.
But they set the limits way higher than science would actually dictate. Is that what you're saying?
That is what hundreds of scientists say. Let me tell you about the limits that we have. They were set, and the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields has a paper on this, based on a handful of small animal studies where they exposed the animals, 5 monkeys and 8 rats, to high levels of microwaves for under an hour. It is these small animal studies with small sample sizes that they determined what the level of harm would be. And it was when the animals stopped pressing the lever for food, under an hour of an exposure to microwaves, which obviously heat them. So the engineers at that point decided that heating is the effect. The limits we have for cell towers are based on not overheating, but not for long-term effects like cancer, damage to the immune system, reproductive system, genetic impacts, oxidative stress. None of those are considered in the limits we have.
And so the RF that's coming out of the cell towers, is that different? Because I had RFK on the show and he talked about that your cell phone also emits EMFs, right? And that can also cause cancer, and it's causing brain cancers and tumors in people. That's what, according to RFK, who's now the HHS secretary. So are they different, similar? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So a tower is connecting to the phone, and the phone is connecting to the tower with invisible electromagnetic signals. They're artificial. So when we talk about cell tower radiation, there's both what's coming from the tower. So whether you're using a phone or not, if you have a cell tower in close proximity, you're going to get a higher level than if you're further away. And then your phone also is emitting the same kind. However, it's very intense. Like if it's close up to you, and some women put it in their bra, for example, or you're holding it up close, putting it near your head, you're going to get a much higher level absorbed into your body. However, studies have shown that over time, the amount that you absorb from a cell tower in children who aren't using phones a lot, young children, can be more than the amount that they use the phone on a daily basis. But we're having really overlapping types of exposures. We have cell towers, cell phones, the wireless, the Bluetooth, everything, all of these different cameras and smart things. All of it is creating exposures every day, and it's increasing in our lives.
And go ahead.
They're increasing. We have increasing levels from what there were years ago. Yet our limits are from 1996, haven't changed since. And there's been no review by a federal agency on all of the science.
So is there hard science behind the connection between this and cancer, for instance, or any other thing that's harmful?
Yes, there's published, peer-reviewed, credible science, the National Toxicology Program, which is one of the most important and animal test laboratories in the U.S. government that tests all kinds of chemicals and toxins. They did studies on animals, rats and mice, 2-year studies where they exposed the animals for the 2 years, and then they sacrificed them and tested them and found what they have deemed as clear evidence of an association with tumors.
Oh, no.
Then the Ramazzini Institute in Italy, which is also an incredible test center where they test animals with different toxins, glyphosate and so forth. And they tested animals with a much lower level of exposure that our FCC limits would consider in compliance in terms of what our cell tower emission levels are, and found the same tumor types as were elevated as were found in the National Toxicology Program study, which, by the way, are also similar to what in the animals to humans, what humans have, what associations between humans who've used cell phones for long term have also gotten those same tumor types. So there are many scientists who would say that the science is adequate to determine that it is a probable, or some say proven, carcinogen in humans because of the research. Now, what happened was when the NTP, the National Toxicology Program study, came out, at that time, the FDA said they didn't agree with the results, and that because they were animal studies, it didn't completely translate to humans. What the scientists, the independent scientists have said is that, of course, an animal is not a human, but you do an assessment to determine what the implications are for humans. And they haven't seen that kind of assessment in order to determine what is a level then that is appropriate for humans based on that information. And there's also studies showing oxidative stress, sperm damage, decreased testosterone, all kinds of really a whole myriad, a broad range of effects, including to animals, wildlife.
And so, why do you think that? So, who is supposed to, in the government? Is it the FCC? Is it the FDA? Is it both of them? Who is supposed to be alarmed by this and doing something about it?
That is the best question. And it used to be the EPA, which was researching this and doing the research to develop and identify a safety standard. What is the level that there's harm? And then what do we set it for humans, which is normally lower than the number that they have as, the level of harm they found in different studies in order to protect all the population, children, people who are sick. However, when they were amidst actually setting that limit, they were defunded in 1996 when the Telecom Act passed. Heaviest lobbyists, one of the most heavy lobbying time periods at the time, and they were fully defunded from that work. Instead, the FCC, which has the regulatory authority, no health and safety scientists on staff, no public health experts, no medical doctors, they then adopted limits that had really been developed much earlier based on this, that heating is the only harm. That's how we got our limits. They are not safety standards. They were not developed by federal agencies. And when it comes to cell tower radiation, as far as I know, there is no agency that's looking at all of the science on that.
And so have you talked to anybody in any of these regulatory bodies inside the government?
Well, when I wrote the EPA, and this was a part of our lawsuit, the federal lawsuit that you were talking about in the intro, about this issue, they said the last time that they looked at the science was decades ago, and they said that they were not doing any research. This was a few years ago. I don't know if it's changed because I haven't heard anything, if it has. And they referred me to their 1985 review of the biological effects of EMFs. So that was key in our lawsuit, because when the FCC said a few years ago in 2019, we don't need to update their limits, we sued along with many petitioners. And the FCC did not win the case. They were ordered to address the evidence that they had ignored, which was impacts to children, long-term effects, environmental effects, how we have limits from 1996, before there even was a smartphone or Internet of Things, how technology changed. And they have not responded to the court. They were ordered to explain how their limits were adequately protective. So if their limits are so protective, why can't they just explain? Why can't they issue a report or something showing how their limits are adequate.
So they're ignoring the court order?
Yes, since 2021.
And so what's the what's the redress that you have when they don't follow a court? Isn't the court supposed to do something about that?
Well, in cases like these, it can actually take years. This is not untypical. They didn't appeal to the Supreme Court. I don't think they would have won. So that means that the order stands. And there have been motions that have been filed. Way back several years ago, we filed a motion. I know EHT has filed a motion. Children's Health Defense has filed a motion. So I am actually a petitioner in the case as well, in addition to being in the organization that was a petitioner. And what you do next is you can then sue again and end up in court. But the judge could say this issue is not ripe for me to rule. You have to give them time. Agencies, there's deference to agencies. They don't expect, they give them this time. So I think the time is now for them to respond, because here they are. They're fast tracking cell towers. That's what the FCC is doing. And in the video that you saw, there's been a comment period where people can comment and put in what they think about this proposal to fast track cell towers. And many, hundreds, there are about 5,000 comments, and many of them said, you need to deal with the court order before you can fast track all of these cell towers, because we know it will elevate the level that we're exposed to.
And is that, do you think that'll have any effect, that public commentary?
Well, I think what needs to happen is a full and frank airing of this whole issue, which we haven't had. A transparent process by which all of the science can be laid out on the table, discussed, evaluated, and that's the first step. I mean, we also need to be reducing exposure. What scientists are saying is we should reduce exposure instead of increase it. We shouldn't be introducing all these new technologies. We're now onto 6G. They're pulling in different frequencies, different modulations that have been untested for safety, because there is no pre-market safety testing for long-term exposure in this country.
So people, you can't really do anything to protect yourself from cell towers, or can you?
Well, you can. There is shielding, but it's tricky, and sometimes it can cause more. And there's not much they can do. So people who have the means move. Well, you can. There is shielding, but it's tricky, and sometimes it can cause more problems than not. So, some people move. They try not to live close to towers. Some people are in situations, apartment buildings where there's an antenna right outside their window, and there's not much they can do. So people who have the means move, but you can reduce your exposure by, not putting the phone to your head. And there's a lot of tips and tricks we have at Environmental Health Sciences if you're interested. But where we are is that the cell towers, if this passes, if the FCC moves forward with what it's doing, and Congress, you're going to have little say when a cell tower is proposed in your community.
Do you have any faith, hope, or prediction that this is going to turn out the right way, and that the local municipalities will have more power, or is this going to just be steamrolled?
Well, I can't say what's going to happen, but I do know that when people wake up to this, they get organized on it. And there are people organized across the country. So, other countries we have such high, you talked about it, and I talked about it in the video, but we allow the highest level of radiation compared to many other countries. Many countries have no cell towers at schools, or have it be at a distance from a school or a home. We don't have any protections in place. And when people have cell towers going up in front of their homes, they get organized, they get their community organized, and then I believe something's gets done when people get on this issue. I do not believe all hope is lost. I believe this is actually a wake-up call.
And do you have a website people can go to?
Yes, Environmental Health Sciences, ehsciences.org, and we also have a wireless and EMF program. And you can search cell towers to see the information on cell towers and what you can do, how to get involved on the issue. So there's a lot.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate you being on this and bringing this to my attention. And now we can bring it to everybody who watches this show's attention, and they can get involved and organize. And maybe we could take back some power. Theodora Scorado, I really appreciate you coming on. Anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
I just want to say thank you for having me on. And the next step is also having the industry compete on safety, because that's the way we're also going to push this mountain. There are ways, there are solutions to this issue that R&D can solve. There can be much less radiation and still you can use your technology. So a lot of solutions.
Okay. Well, fingers crossed they do some of those solutions. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Is a scientist and journalist who is at the forefront of a global movement to tear down conducting wire. A History of Electricity and Life by Arthur Fistenberg. Introduction. About the author. Arthur Fistenberg is a scientist and journalist who is at the forefront of a global movement to tear down the taboo surrounding this subject. And how? After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Cornell University with a degree in mathematics, he attended the University of California, Irvine School of Medicine from 1978 to 1982. Injury by X-ray overdose cut short his medical career. For the past 37 years, he has been a researcher, consultant, and lecturer on the health and environmental effects of electromagnetic radiation, as well as a practitioner of several healing arts. About the book. This remarkably well-documented and referenced book is a cornerstone in the sense that it traces the deployment of electricity in our civilization in terms of its interaction and living organisms, from its initial discovery in the 1740s all the way to our time, and even projected into the future. It should be noted that the title refers to the entire electromagnetic spectrum comprising the colors of the rainbow, including the invisible frequencies such as radio frequencies and fields generated around conducting wires. From the very beginning, captured in a bottle. 1746 saw the first discoveries involving electricity in Europe. Leiden's experiment consisted of revealing the electric fluid by means of rubbing the hand on a glass globe spun rapidly on its axis. The static electricity thus produced made a great impression in the schools, fairs, and on private persons who had the financial means to acquire this device, with some producing electrical arcs and others brief electric shocks. The phenomenon was so popular that it was not socially acceptable to suggest that electricity could be dangerous, even though the shocks caused headaches, nosebleeds, and fatigue in certain experimenters and in the animals used in the tests. Society was taken over by electromania, and the most fervent exponents of being electroshocked in good company between 2 glasses of champagne began to receive harmful symptoms. In spite of this, the medical establishments equipped themselves with the Leyden flask, the forerunner of the condenser, for the purpose of carrying out medical experiments for abortions or other applications. Lovely. In this way, a completely new field of knowledge emerged concerning the biological effects of electricity on people, plants, and animals. Knowledge that was then much more extensive than that of our contemporary physicians, who daily see patients suffering from the effects of electricity without recognizing them for what they are, and who are generally ignorant of the very existence of this knowledge. 2. The deaf to hear and the lame to walk. Noting, rarely positive and far more often negative, effects of the application of electrical voltage on living organisms, the researchers and physicians concluded that living organisms function in a conjunction with electricity. Certain cures were brought about using electricity. As for example, in 1851, when the neurologist Duchenne treated deafness in dozens of patients by means of locally applied electrical impulses. Experiments were carried out, notably by Volta in Italy, as well as other researchers in the Western world, which found evidence that the nervous, cardiac, cardiovascular, gustatory, sudatory, and other symptoms could be stimulated using the electricity produced by galvanic couples. It was found that the number of curative effects were significantly fewer than the harmful effects that were listed, which include the symptoms of electrosensitivity, ES, known today, such as headaches, dizziness, nausea, mental confusion, fatigue, depression, insomnia, etc. Electrical sensitivity. French botanist Thomas Francis Dalibard, who carried out electrical experiments on living organisms, confided in a letter to Benjamin Franklin, dated 1762, that he was unable to continue his work, as his own organism had developed an intolerance to electricity. He was one of the first people to be officially declared electrohypersensitive, EHS. Reading that account, it is clear that this botanist must have been severely affected. Other professors and researchers had the same unfortunate experience and were thus forced to stop their work. Even the famous Benjamin Franklin was affected by a neurological illness during his researches on electricity from 1753 onwards, and the symptoms are largely reminiscent of electrohypersensitivity. Come to think of it, maybe that was what was wrong with Tesla. Too much electricity. So much so that, at the end of the 18th century, it was generally acknowledged that electricity could make people ill, depending on the sex of the electricity. I assume he means negative or positive. The morphology and the physical condition of the individual concerned. It had similarly been observed that certain individuals reacted strongly to changes in the weather, which often correlated with electrical changes in the atmosphere. The names of some of those individuals are still famous today. Among them, Christopher Columbus, Dante, Charles Darwin, Benjamin Franklin, Goethe, Victor, Hugo, and Leonardo da Vinci, Martin Luther, Michelangelo, Mozart, Napoleon, Rousseau, and Voltaire. The road not taken. During the 1790s, science was faced with an identity crisis regarding the interpretation of the unification of the four different fluids: electricity, light, magnetism, and heat. Where electricity was concerned, on the one hand, there was Luigi Galvani, who regarded electricity as an integral part of the living organism, and on the other, Volta's theory that electricity was only a secondary effect of internal chemical reactions in the living organism. Volta, the inventor of the extremely useful electric battery, which had the potential to become a great money spinner, succeeded in winning the argument against the more global view of the interaction between electricity and the living organism. Chronic electrical illness. From the end of the 19th century onwards, urban landscapes were transformed by the installation of telegraph lines throughout the industrialized countries. This technology uses voltages of the order of 80 volts on a single conductor, with the return current being earthed. That period saw the emergence of the first stray currents to which living beings were exposed. It was then that one saw the appearance of diseases of civilization, such as neurasthenia, which afflicted Frank Lloyd Wright and Theodore Roosevelt, among other well-known figures. It should be noted in passing that neurasthenia is nearly similar to electrohypersensitivity, which is the more modern term for the same sensitivity to electricity. Around half of the telegraphists who were employed to manipulate the electrical current sent through the lines and were thus exposed to very strong electromagnetic fields were afflicted by telegraphic sickness. Once again, the symptoms were the same as those of EHS. Later on, in around 1915, it was the telephone operators who were experiencing the same symptom, for they were exposed to the electromagnetic fields from the communications for hours on end at their desks. In 1989, it was noted that in Winnipeg, 47% of the telephone operators were suffering from the same symptoms. However, in 1894, the noted Viennese psychiatrist Sigmund Freud wrote an article whose effect was disastrous. For all the unfortunates who suffered from telegraphic sickness, neurasthenia, microwave syndrome, or EHS, rather than seeing the external cause, which was electromagnetic pollution, he attributed these symptoms to disordered thoughts or poorly controlled emotions. As a result, today millions of citizens afflicted by electronic smog are being medicated instead of reducing their exposure to this pollutant. Sigmund Freud renamed neurasthenia, which was known to be caused by electricity, as a neurosis, anxiety, an anxiety attack or panic attack. This opened the way for the reckless deployment of electrification to continue unimpeded. It should be noted that in Russia, neurasthenia is listed as an environmental illness, as Freud's damaging redefinition was rejected there. 6. The behavior of plants. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose and other researchers conducted numerous electrical experiments on plants and other living organisms, whose results showed definite effects. He discovered that the nerves of the plants or animals display variable behavior and that their resistivity can vary considerably, depending on the application of the current and its polarity. He also noted that the intensity of current necessary to modify the conductivity of the nerves is infinitesimal in terms of the voltage applied, something in the order of 0.3 microamperes, or 0.3. That current is significantly less than the current that is induced through a telephone conversation using a cell phone. Bose likewise discovered that the threshold of a current's bioactivity is 1 femtoampere, as this researcher was also familiar with radio frequency transmissions. He carried out an experiment in which a plant was exposed to a radio signal of 30 megahertz at a distance of about 218 yards, 200 meters, and found that the plant's growth was retarded during the emission period. He likewise showed that the circulation of sap in the plant slowed down when it was irradiated by the same radio signal. 7. Acute electrical illness. During the 1880s, London was supplied with direct current, but certain physicists had discovered that the distribution of alternating current generated fewer ohmic losses in the wires. There followed a battle of currents. Even though many scientists, including Edison, strongly criticized the more dangerous effects of alternating current, ironically, it's precisely because alternating current is more harmful that it is used in the electric chair. And as everyone knows, the electrical current of the power grid is alternating. In 1889, full-scale electrification was carried out in the USA, shortly thereafter in Europe, the same year, as if by chance, doctors were inundated with cases of flu, which had until then appeared only infrequently. The victims' symptoms were far more neurological in nature, resembling neurasthenia, and did not include respiratory disorders. The pandemic lasted for 4 years and killed at least a million people. In 2001, Canadian astronomer Ken Tapping showed that the influenza pandemics over the previous 3 centuries correlated with peaks in solar magnetic activity on an 11-year cycle. It has also been found that some outbreaks of influenza spread over enormous areas in just a few days, a fact that is difficult to explain by contagion from one person to another. Also, numerous experiments seeking to prove direct contagion through close contact, droplets of mucus, sounds familiar, or other processes have proved fruitless. From 1933 to the present day, virologists have been unable to present any experimental study proving that influenza spreads through normal contact between people. All attempts to do so have met with failure. Mystery on the Isle of Wight. In 1904, bees began to die on the Isle of Wight, following the installation of radio transmitters by Marconi. These transmitters work at frequencies close to megahertz levels. On the other side of the channel, Jacques Arsène d'Arsenal, I'm sorry if I butchered that, showed that sharp and hooked electromagnetic signals are far more toxic than sinusoidal signals. The truth was that after a year and a half of experimenting with radio transmitters in full health at the age of 22, Marconi began to develop fevers. These attacks continued for the rest of his life. In 1904, while working on setting up a transmitter powerful enough for the transatlantic communications, these fevers became so intense that they were thought to be malaria. In 1905, he married Beatrice O'Brien, and after their honeymoon, they settled on the island close to a transmitter. As soon as Beatrice had settled in, she began to complain of tinnitus. After 3 months, she fell ill with severe jaundice. She had to return to London to give birth to a baby who only lived a few weeks and died of unknown causes. During the same period, Marconi spent several months suffering from fever and delirium. Between 1918 and 1921, he suffered suicidal depression while working shortwave transmitter. 1927, while on his honeymoon from his second marriage, he collapsed with chest pain and was diagnosed with serious cardiac disorders. Between 1934 and 1937, while he was developing microwave technology, he had 9 heart attacks, the final one killing him at the age of 63. On the same island, at Osborne House, Queen Victoria suffered cerebral hemorrhages and died on the evening of January 22, 1901, just as Marconi was putting a new transmitter into operation less than 13 miles away. In 1901, there were only 2 transmitters, while in 1904 there were 4, making this island the most irradiated place on the planet. leaving bees no room for survival. In 1906, a survey revealed that 90% of the bees had completely disappeared for no apparent reason. The colonies were brought to the island. New colonies were brought to the island, but these likewise died within a week. This epidemic spread across England, and then across the Western world, and then gradually stabilized, until the armies equipped themselves with various high-powered radio transmitters towards the end of the First World War, triggering, as we have seen, the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, which actually began in the United States at the Naval Radio School of Cambridge, Massachusetts, with 400 initial cases. The epidemic rapidly spread to 1,127 soldiers at Funston Camp, Kansas, where wireless connections had been installed. What intrigued the doctors was that while 15% of the civilian population were suffering from nosebleeds, 40% of the Navy suffered from them. Other bleeding also occurred, and a third of those who died did so due to internal hemorrhaging of the lungs and brain. It's terrible. Man, it's just an awful way to go. And a third, the composition of the blood that had been altered, as the measured coagulation time was more than twice as long as normal. These symptoms are incompatible with the effects of the influenza respiratory viruses, but totally consistent with the devastating effects of electricity. Another incongruity was that 2/3 of the victims were healthy young people. A further atypical flu symptom was that the pulse slowed to rates between 36 and 48, whereas this is a common result of exposure to electromagnetic fields. In addition, it was possible to successfully treat some sufferers with massive doses of calcium. The military physician, Dr. George A. Soper, testified that the virus was spreading faster than the speed of movement of people. Various experiments were conducted attempting to infect subjects either by direct close contact or by inoculation with mucus or blood, but experimenters were unable to demonstrate any infection by this means. Each new influenza pandemic corresponds to a new advance in electrical technology, such as the Asian flu of 1957-58, following the installation of a powerful radar surveillance system, the outbreak of the Hong Kong flu from early 1968 onwards, following the commissioning of 28 military satellites for space surveillance at the altitude of the Van Allen belts, which protect us from cosmic radiation. 9. Earth's electric envelope. With a core consisting mainly of iron, the rotating Earth is primarily protected by the ionosphere, then the plasmasphere, delimited by the Van Allen radiation belts at an altitude of between 1,000 and 55,000 kilometers. That's quite a ways. And by its tail, the magnetosphere, which is exposed to solar winds originating from our sun and constitutes a kind of dynamo, a complex electrical system. The exchanges of electricity between the Earth's crust and the atmosphere, and even the ionosphere, are permanent and constant. They are in a delicate balance. Yes, and HAARP just pushing them things out there. Crazy. And a kind of electrical respiration of the entire system has allowed life to develop on our planet, which is charged with negative ions, balanced by the positively charged ionosphere. An average vertical electrical field of the order of 130 volts per meter can be observed, with values that can, for example, rise to 4,000 volts per meter during storms. In 1953, One of the primary parameters of this electrical oscillation of our environment was discovered in the form of Winfried-Schumann's frequencies, which respire at 7.83 Hertz, with harmonics at 14, 20, 26, and 32 Hertz, called very low frequencies, VLF. It is no wonder that the organisms living in this environment are imbued with these physical values, and that, for example, our brain rhythms lie within these frequency ranges, such as the alpha rhythm, which lies between 8 and 13 Hertz, while we perceive the visible frequencies ranging from blue to red of the electromagnetic spectrum. Some animals are able to see other electromagnetic frequencies, such as bees, which can see ultraviolet frequencies, or those salamanders or catfish, which can see the low electrical frequencies, while snakes are able to see the infrared frequencies. Laboratory experiments on hamsters, for example, showed that reducing the temperature and shortening the duration of daylight was not enough to put them into hibernation. Similarly, hamsters raised in Faraday cages refused to hibernate, even though the light and temperature parameters correspond to those of winter, until the Faraday protection was removed. Other experiments were conducted, such as that carried out at the Max Planck Institute in 1967 by the physiologist Rutger Weaver, using 2 buried rooms without windows or outside contact, one shielded from natural electromagnetic fields, the other one not. It was shown that in the shielded chamber, the circadian rhythms of the volunteers became desynchronized and could vary between 12 and 65 hours, accompanied by metabolic disorders, while the subjects in the chamber immersed in the Earth's fields kept a coherent rhythm of about 24 hours, and their metabolism continued to function more normally. It has been scientifically demonstrated that a living organism needs to be bathed in the electromagnetic system of our natural environment in order to function well. Moreover, acupuncture, the ancient method used in traditional Chinese medicine, works by using our own electrical properties and modifying the energy flow of the meridians. It has been known for some time, since the 1950s, that these meridians actually correspond to electrical circuits, and that the Chinese qi corresponds to the concept of electricity. These meridians serve dual functions. They not only transport information and energy internally from one organ of the body to another, but also serve as antennas for picking up the flow of environmental electromagnetic energy. In the early 1970s, the atmospheric physicists discovered that the Earth's magnetic field was significantly disturbed by human electrical activity. By injecting a signal into space and capturing its echo, it was established that the initial signal had in fact been modified by multiples of the 60 Hertz powered grid used in North America. However, this discovery did not prevent the HARP project from being launched to deliberately modify the electromagnetic properties of our planet. I mean, they're just so brilliant. Similarly, the Van Allen belts that protect us from cosmic rays have already been altered by our electrical activity. And it may be that these double belts were originally only a single belt, which, under the influence of human emission of electric charges into space, has been depleted at its center. Interesting. I'm just thinking about something that Michael Tessarion once said. Satellite observations show that the radiation emitted by high voltage lines often has the effect of suppressing the natural radiation of lightning. In light of this fact, it is logical to conclude that the influenza pandemics of recent decades are linked to human electrical activity. Porphyrins and the basis of life. Number 10. Any transformation of energy in the biological domain involves porphyrins, pigments made up of 4 pyrrole molecules. The fact that our nerves are able to function properly is thanks in part to porphyrins, which play a role in our cell processes. These are special molecules that function as the interface between oxygen and life. These molecules are highly reactive and interact with toxic metals or synthetic elements derived from oil, and with electromagnetic fields, which in excess cause porphyria, which is more an environmental sensitivity than a disease. Porphyria, which was discovered in 1891, afflicts about 10% of today's population, and first appeared at the same time as the general electrification of the Western world, from 1889 onwards. Porphyrins are central to the effects of electric smog, because they not only cause EHS, MCS, or porphyria, but also cardiovascular diseases, cancer, and diabetes, as they are involved in a multiple of energetic biological processes. In the 1960s, the biologists Alan Frey and Lod Zimmer's Sedlak showed that our organisms definitely have a bioelectric component, and that some of our cells sometimes behave like conductors or capacitors, or semiconductors, transistors, like the components that we find in our electric devices. This is the case with myelin, the sheath that covers our nerves, which contains porphyrin bonded to zinc. Should environmental poisons, such as chemical products or toxic metals, affect this equilibrium, the myelin sheath will be damaged, which alters the excitability of the nerves it surrounds. The entire nervous system then becomes hyper-responsive to stimuli of all kinds, such as electromagnetic fields. The system enters a state of divergent instability, the effect becoming the cause. Contrary to the view that mitochondria are the elements of our cells that produce energy, the concept of the myelin sheath as being one giant mitochondrion is beginning to gain credence. The connection between porphyria and zinc was discovered in the 1950s by Henry Peters at Wisconsin Medical School. Patients suffering from porphyria and neurological symptoms were excreting a great deal of zinc in their urine, which led him to the idea that zinc chelating might improve their condition. He did indeed see an improvement. Despite the widespread benefit belief that zinc deficiency is related to those specific disorders, similarly, certain experiments have shown that zinc chelating improves Alzheimer's disease. An Australian medical team demonstrated in autopsies that the brains of patients with Alzheimer's disease contain twice as much zinc as those of heart. In 1980, cardiac arrest in young athletes was rare, with only 9 cases a year. From then on, cases steadily increased by 10% per year until 1996, when the rate suddenly doubled to 64 cases, rising to 66 in the following year and 76 in the last year of the study. The American medical community could find no explanation for this, while in Europe, in 2002, German environmental physicians launched an appeal calling for a moratorium on antennas and cell towers, as the waves they were emitting were causing cardiovascular disorders. That was the Freiburg Appeal. Dr. Samuel Milham, an epidemiologist at the Washington State Department of Health, showed through his work that cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer are largely, if not entirely, caused by electricity. Paradoxically, studies of cholesterol dating from the early 20th century did not show that cholesterol levels correlated with a higher risk of heart disease, contrary to what commonly is regarded as fact nowadays. A lot of that going around. A study of animals at the Philadelphia Zoo showed that from 1916 to 1964, cholesterol levels in mammals and birds increased by a factor between 10 and 20, even though their diet had remained completely unchanged. The only parameter that had been dramatically changed was the increase in radio frequencies. During the Second World War, a number of soldiers complained of symptoms similar to those of neurasthenia. It was initially believed, in accordance with Freud's doctrine, that these soldiers were suffering from anxiety problems. However, a study of 144 cases was then conducted by Dr. Mandel Cohen. This study revealed that the soldiers were, in fact, physiologically less resistant and suffered from irritable heart. They had difficulty in assimilating oxygen and had to breathe twice as fast as their comrades in better health in order to get enough oxygen. It emerged that their mitochondria were not functioning efficiently. In the end, the study showed that these soldiers were hypersensitive in a general sense, but particularly to electricity. From the 1950s onwards, scientists in the Soviet Union also observed that radio frequencies altered the electrocardiograms of individuals exposed to them, as they modified mitochondrial efficiency. Graphs showing the statistics for death rates from heart disease broken down by the degree of electrification of the American states in 1931 and 1940 are also very explicit to leave no doubt as to the toxicity of electromagnetic fields for the heart, thus exonerating cholesterol and diets deemed too high in fat. The transformation of diabetes. Thomas Edison, who was involved in discoveries relating to electrical technology and was therefore exposed to electromagnetic fields to a far greater extent than his fellow citizens of the time, was diagnosed with diabetes, a disease that was very rare in 1889. Another researcher, Alexander Graham Bell, who worked in the field of telephony, and invented the telephone, was known to constantly complain of the symptoms of neurasthenia, known as EHS today. In 1915, he too was diagnosed with diabetes. In 1876, the book Disease of Modern Life by Ward Richardson described diabetes as a rare modern disease caused by mental exhaustion due to overwork or by a shock to the nervous system. The excessive intake of toxic, addictive sugar in our modern diet naturally provides a convenient explanation of why diabetes, including prediabetes, affects more than half of all Americans today. However, this explanation is too simplistic. Even Dr. Evan Joslin showed that between 1900 and 1917, sugar intake had increased by 17%, while mortality from diabetes had doubled. Later, in 1987, a study of Native Americans showed radically different rates of death from diabetes, depending on territory, ranging from 7 per 1,000 in the Northwest to 380 per 1,000 in Arizona. During those years, neither lifestyle nor diet could explain such a divergence. One environmental factor, however, can indeed explain such a difference. The electrification of Native American reservations proceeded at different paces, and those in the Northwest were only electrified much later. By contrast, the Arizona reservation lies in the immediate vicinity of Phoenix. Moreover, this Native American community had its own power plant and its own telecommunication system. Another example is the population of Brazil, a major sugar producer for centuries, where diabetes was still unknown in 1870, after it had already emerged as a disease of civilization in North America. Even today, Brazilians consume 70 kilograms of refined sugar per year and per person, more than North Americans, and yet they still have 2.5 times fewer cases of diabetes than the USA. In Bhutan, diabetes was virtually non-existent until 2002, after which the electrification of the country began in 2004. 634 new cases of diabetes were announced in 2005, 944 in 2006, and 1,470 in 2007, 2,540 with 15 deaths in 2012. There were 91 deaths, and diabetes was the 8th leading cause of death in the country, even though people's diet had not changed. As we saw in the previous chapter, electronic smog acting on mitochondria prevents the efficient use of absorbed sugar, i.e., the combustion of sugar. The sugar, which cannot be converted into mechanical energy, is stored as fat by the body. Statistical graphs for diabetes death rates, broken down by the degree of electrification of the American states in 1931 and 1940, are also very explicit to leave no doubt as to the role played by electromagnetic fields in the appearance of large-scale diabetes, thus exonerating sugar consumption to some extent. In 1997, there was a 31% increase in the number of cases of diabetes in the United States in a single year, which precisely correlated with the mass introduction of cell phones in the country. Cancer and the starvation of life. In February 2011, the Supreme Court of Italy accused Cardinal Roberto Tucci, the outgoing president of Vatican Radio, of having created a public nuisance by polluting the environment with radio frequencies through negligence. In fact, in the period from 1997 to 2003, the children living within a 12-kilometer radius of the radio antennas had an 8 times higher rate of leukemia, lymphomas, myelomas, than those who lived further away. The same held true for adults, with a rate 7 times higher. The German doctor and Professor Otto Heinrich Warburg, winner of the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1931, showed that cancer is a regression oxygen-deprived cells, which drives them to multiply anarchically, as in a primeval world where oxygen was not present to the extent that it is today. The initial oxygen deprivation is due to a malfunction of the mitochondria, which, as we have seen, can be caused by electromagnetic fields or other pollutants such as smoke, pesticides, food additives, and air pollution. The same principle of cellular oxygen deficiency applies to diabetes, which is why there is a higher rate of cancers among diabetics than the rest of the population. At Philadelphia Zoo from 1901 to 1955, a rise in the rate of malignant tumors was noted in mammals, varying from twice to 22 times more between those dates. Cancer death statistics show a clear correlation between the electrification of countries and cancer rates. For example, in the USA, the rate was 6.6 per thousand from 1841 to 1850. It subsequently more than doubled from 1851 to 1860, with a rate of 14 per thousand. The true explanation for this can be found in the mass deployment of the telegraph in 1854. In 1914, there were 2 deaths from cancer among the 63,000 Native Americans living in reserves. without electrification, while in the rest of the country the cancer mortality rate was 25 times higher. Between 1920 and 1921, following the introduction of the first AM radio stations, cancer mortality increased by between 3 and 10% in some Western countries. The Swedish researchers Ole Johansson and Örjan Hallberg have shown a clear correlation between breast, prostate, and lung cancer rates and the exposure of the population to radio frequencies. They point to a significant increase in rates in 1920, 1955, 1969, and a decrease in 1978, corresponding respectively to the increase in radio frequency smog due to the introduction of AM radio, FM radio, and TV1, the arrival of color TV2, and then the cessation of AM radio broadcasts. These same researchers have likewise found a very clear linear correlation between the number of FM radio transmitters per region and the incidence of melanomas, with the exposed locations having 11 times more melanomas than the white zones. They also found that melanomas rarely appear on those areas of the body most exposed to the sun, such as the forehead, nose, shoulders, and feet, but more often in those areas of the body usually protected from the sun. Moreover, the proliferation of skin cancers occurred before the coming into fashion of seaside holidays, during which sun exposure is intense. This shows that melanomas are not predominantly caused by the sun, but by radio frequencies. The statistical graphs of death rates from cancer, as well as from diabetes and cardiovascular disease, broken down by the degree of electrification of American states in 1931 and 1940, are likewise very explicit, leaving no doubt whatever that electromagnetic fields play a role in the increase in cancers. Genuine data on brain tumors is hard to find, as the cell phone lobby has been infiltrating this field for decades in order to commission biased studies. One of their studies even shows a decrease in the incidence of tumors, correlating with the intensive use of cell phones. However, the University of Calgary has found evidence of a 30% increase in the incidence of malignant brain tumors in the period from 2012 to 2013, and Lennart Hartl, professor of oncology at the University Hospital in Åbo, Sweden, has demonstrated that 2,000 hours of cell phone use increases the risk of developing a tumor by a factor of between 3 and 8, depending on the age of the subject and their phone habits. In 2000, Neil Cherry analyzed the cancer rates of children in San Francisco in relation to the distance between their home and the television and FM radio stations and radio transmitters on Sutro Tower. Children living on hills or ridges were more affected. Those who lived within 1 kilometer of the antenna had a 9 times higher incidence of leukemia, a 15 times higher incidence of lymphoma, and a 31 times higher incidence of brain cancer. Lovely. Overall, an 18 times higher rate than those living outside that 1 kilometer radius. A practical treatise on nervous exhaustion in 1880 by George Miller Beard, the electrotherapist and friend of Thomas Edison, contains an intriguing observation. Although these difficulties are not directly fatal, and so do not appear in the mortality tables, although, on the contrary, they may tend to prolong life and to protect the system against febrile and inflammatory disease. Yet, the degree of suffering they cause is enormous. Those who suffered the most seemed rather young for their age. Furthermore, Beard noted that one rare disease seemed more likely to afflict the neuroaesthetic subjects than the rest of the population. That disease was diabetes. Beard had already observed that the increase in life expectancy did not go hand in hand with life quality. The mysterious correlation between the sufferings of neuroasthenic people, whose symptoms were the same as those of contemporary electro-hypersensitive people, and the prolongation of their lives pointed to a major dysfunction. In addition, it has long been observed that the ascetic lifestyle with a low-calorie diet can increase life expectancy and health. This is the case, for example, with the population of Okinawa, where the number of centurions is 40 times greater than those in the population of richer prefectures further to the north. Researchers in the field of aging have pointed out that the force that drives and sustains our lives is the system of electron transport in the mitochondria of our cells. It is here that the air we breathe and the food we eat are combined at a rate that determines our rate of aging, and hence our life expectancy. Whereas the achievement of a slowing down of the combustion process within our cells through moderating the amount of energy delivered may be beneficial. Another way of slowing down may conversely be disastrous. This is the poisoning of the electron transport chain. One possible way of being poisoned is chronic exposure to artificial electromagnetic fields. This ever-increasing pollution subjects the electrons of our mitochondria to external forces, slowing them down, depriving our cells of oxygen, and causing EHS symptoms. "15. You mean you can hear electricity?" In 1962, a woman contacted the University of Santa Barbara, California, USA, asking for help in finding the source of the mysterious sound that she was hearing everywhere, at home, even though she lived in a quiet residential district. This sound was keeping her awake and was detrimental to her health. Measurements did indeed show that particularly strong electromagnetic fields were emanating from all electrical conductors, not only from the grid, but also from the radiators and other metallic elements. Yet, the stethoscope itself detected no sound at all. The engineer carried out an experiment, recording the measured fields on tape and playing them to the woman affected by these noises. She confirmed that was what she was hearing. So this woman was able to hear the electromagnetic fields in her environment. Grounding facilities and electronic filters were installed to reduce disturbances to an acceptable level. However, long before that, Volta and other researchers had already conducted experiments in which they had successfully produced various sounds by applying voltage to the ears. Much later, in the 1960s, the biologist Alan Fry published articles on the ability of some subjects to hear emissions from a radar installation. The mechanical model, that reminds me when I was a kid. I grew up about 1.5 miles from Selfridge Air Force Base, and at that time they had the radar dish on, and for years they were just pelting the people in the neighborhoods with that radar signal. And my dad got diabetes, come to think of it. That's just crazy. Every time the dish would pass our house, our TV, it would go zzz. It would make this noise. And after a while, we just got deaf to it. But it did it for years. The mechanical model of the functioning of the ear, as taught in schools, does not provide any explanation for these observed phenomena. Noting this, the biochemist Lionel Naftalin developed a new model of the functioning of the human ear, taking into account the well-known phenomenon of piezoelectricity, a force utilized by electricians, which he discovered in the gel covering the cilia of the inner ear. In this gel, which is found nowhere else in the human body and has special electrical properties, a voltage of 100 to 120 millivolts was present, which is considered high in the field of bioelectronics. This piezoelectrical gel transforms sound wave into an electrical signal that is communicated to the cilia of the inner ear. This new revised model of the functioning of the human ear not only explains the ability of certain subjects to hear an electromagnetic signal under certain conditions, but also why so modern people today suffer from tinnitus, and why certain groups of people amounting to 2 to 11% of the world's population are hearing a global humming all around the planet. Today, about 44% of American adults suffer from tinnitus at various levels of intensity, while in Sweden a number of young people affected was 12% in 1997 and 42% in 2006. These parasitic sounds are largely the result of living in an environment that is heavily polluted with all kinds of artificial electromagnetic fields. Bees, birds, trees, and humans. Alfonso Belmori Marinas, a Spanish biologist, has correlated the population density of sparrows with the radio frequency radiation values of their habitats. Sparrows cannot survive in most irradiated places where levels exceed 3 volts per meter, whereas there are still 42 birds per hectare at levels of 0.1 volts per meter. He has also observed a marked change in the behavior of storks, whereby stork pairs will fight instead of building the nest or incubating the eggs if they are within 200 meters of a cell tower. The United Kingdom classed the house sparrow as an endangered species after its population declined by 75% between 1994 and 2002, a period that coincided with the deployment of cell phone technology. I do seem to remember back around the turn of the 21st century about giant areas of birds just being dead, just dying. Homing pigeons, breeders of several continents, have found that when released, up to 90% of pigeons fail to find their way back to the dovecote, whereas this percentage should normally be tiny. In 2000, English breeders tried to reroute a race so as to avoid cell towers, in order to give the pigeons a better chance of homing successfully. In 2004, those same breeders commissioned more extensive studies on the impact of microwaves on pigeons. In 2002, the U.S. National Park Service issued a note to biologists studying wild animal behavior, explaining that RFID chips attached to those animals to track them with radio frequencies can radically alter their behavior due to the radio frequencies generated. In environments polluted by electromagnetic fields, robins cannot find their bearings for migration, whereas when they are in a Faraday cage, they are able to do so. An experiment on frog tadpoles reared in 2 separate pools within 140 meters of a cell tower, one without and the other with electromagnetic shielding, displayed mortality rates of 90% and 4%, respectively. The same type of harmful effects are found in insects when they are exposed to the electromagnetic smog that we encounter on a daily basis. And Dr. Pankopoulos, who has experimented on fruit flies, reports that exposure to microwaves at common levels in just a few minutes a day for a few days is the worst known stressor in our daily lives. even worse than chemicals or low-frequency electromagnetic fields. Bees are also being negatively impacted, as we saw on the Isle of Wight at the beginning of this summary. Dr. Daniel Favre, Switzerland, has demonstrated that in the presence of microwaves, bees emit the sound typically heard when they swarm, which suggests that insects want to escape the emission source. The Varroa mite is generally blamed for colony collapse syndrome. However, we forget that this mite has cohabited with bees for a long time. In addition, it can often be observed that nowadays even a dead colony is not infested with parasites, even though this used to be the case before. The finger of blame is also leveled at pesticides. Yet, as we have seen, 90% of the bees on the Isle of Wight disappeared without any pesticides having been used in that area. One true cause of colony collapse is found in human-generated electromagnetic fields, especially cell phone technology. In the 1980s, a burning issue emerged: the death of forests. This was blamed on acid rain, yet the most remote areas with the cleanest air were equally affected. Research was carried out in Germany and Switzerland, and although the soil in the affected forest did indeed prove to be acidic, observation and experimentation showed that such acidity could also be the result of the slow electrolysis of the soil via trees exposed to radar waves. For example, moreover, trees on ridges were more severely affected as they were more exposed to the new radars installed in the 1970s. Another observation was made at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The gigantic Russian radars at Skurda, which were heavily irradiating the whole region in their area in their task of monitoring the West, had not only caused harm to the forest, but also to the animals and the human beings. After numerous studies, it was found that the growth rings of the trees during the years when the radars were operating were much smaller than those from either before or after that period. In Schwarzenberg in Switzerland, a short-wave radio antenna was installed in 1939, and the transmission power was subsequently increased to 450 kilowatts in 1954. This was followed by a deterioration in the health of the local inhabitants, who complained of VHS symptoms. The village children had difficulties at school and seemed unable to advance to higher education, unlike the children of less exposed neighboring villages. Finally, in 1992, a study was carried out which confirmed that within a radius of 900 meters of the antenna, the physiological analysis parameters of people and animals at the site were abnormal. It was also found that the tree growth rings were compressed, but only on the side facing the radiation source. On March 28, 1998, the transmitter was shut down, and a before and after study was carried out. This demonstrated that the melatonin levels of the 58 subjects tested had increased again. A 50-year-old villager was finally able to sleep for a full night without interruption for the first time in his life. On May 29, 1996, Philip Roche, director of the Office for the Environment, stated that there was a proven correlation between the sleep disorders and communication operations. "17. In the country of the blind. How much longer do we have to wait before being able to say, your cell phone is killing me, rather than, I'm electro-hypersensitive? And yet, the number of people suffering from headaches due to using cell phones is huge. In 2010, 2/3 of Ukrainian university students interviewed admitted the fact that it is not socially acceptable to openly discuss this issue. Gro Harlem Brundtland was EHS when she was head of the World Health Organization. She was quite open about the fact, but was forced to resign from her post 1 year later. This deterred over high-ranking public figures from following her example. Of course, they're cowardly and beholden to the super-rich who contribute to their campaign. It's a circus. Only a minority of people suffering from electromagnetic pollution know what they are suffering from, while the great majority have no idea. The entire population is being electrocuted by remote control, and one almost has to apologize for being electrosensitive, or to be precise, electro-hypersensitive. Just as if one had to apologize for being cyanide hypertensive. For the truth is that electricity, as it is currently being used, is toxic. Moreover, statistical graphs clearly show an increase in the mortality rate of the inhabitants of 9 American cities shortly after the first base stations were put into operation. This increased mortality rates from 25 to over 80%. A survey conducted by a daily newspaper, which asked New Yorkers to report whether they had begun suffering from a number of EHS symptoms after November 15, 1996, gathered hundreds of testimonies from a wide range of racial and social classes. The date in question was the day when the first cell phone network went into operation. The Cellular Phone Task Force, an organization started by Arthur Fistenberg in 1996, is inundated with requests for help from people harmed by microwave radio frequencies. So many emitters of all kinds proliferate, from Wi-Fi, WiMAX, radar stations are irradiated, and irradiation emitted from the sky by telecommunication satellites that it seems as if soon there will be nowhere to escape to. Professor Uli Johansson of the prestigious Karolinska Institute, who is famous for awarding the Nobel Prize for Medicine, has focused on demonstrating the effects of electromagnetic smog on living organisms since 1977. The success of his studies led to his being marginalized at his institute. The funding for his research disappearing, and his receiving death threats. On one occasion, he narrowly escaped an attempt on his life through the sabotage of his motorcycle. Despite everything, he continues to inform the world the truth in order to defend, among others, those suffering from EHS, whose lives have become hell on earth. He is disgusted by the way in which the governments of so-called democratic countries can simply abandon the victims of radio frequencies to their fate. Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe, who has dual British and American nationality, completed her studies in 1998. In 2007, after following her F-16 pilot husband to the USA, she became severely affected by EHS without realizing it. Her internet researches finally enabled her to understand what was happening to her. As a doctor, she was puzzled as to how such a profound and disabling condition could exist without ever having heard of it in her profession. To set her mind at rest, she decided to undergo an MRI to rule out the risk of brain cancer. She believed that her death was imminent when the high-frequency pulsations were engaged, but recovered to full health and vitality in Death Valley, far from the radio frequencies. Since then, she has dedicated herself to informing and helping the 5%, at least, of the population who are EHS and have been totally abandoned by the authorities. Yuri Grigorov, who is generally regarded as the grandfather of electromagnetic research in Russia, is extremely concerned about young people above all. He has stated that this is the first time in the history of humanity that people's brains are being openly exposed to microwaves, which is extremely serious in the eyes of the radiologist. In particular, he cites a Korean study which shows that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, in children is connected to the use of cell phones. In the late 1990s, the Swedish neurosurgeon Leif Sulford and his team proved that cell phones make the blood-brain barrier permeable, causing Alzheimer's disease. In 2003, they showed that a single exposure of only 2 hours causes permanent damage to the brain. In 2015, Turkish scientists irradiated rats for an hour a day for a month using typical cell phone waves. The irradiated rats had 10% fewer brain cells than those that had been spared that treatment. The same team experimented on pregnant rats for 9 days at the same radiation level. The rats' progeny showed degeneration of the brain, spinal cord, heart, kidneys, liver, spleen, thymus, and testicles. The same experiment, repeated on young rats, caused atrophy of the spinal cord, together with decreased myelin, like that seen in multiple sclerosis. In September 1998, the first 66 satellites for space telephony went into operation, causing an increase in the USA's national mortality rate by nearly 5% in the 2 subsequent weeks. During the same period, it was observed that birds were no longer flying and that EHS people became particularly ill. Today, about 1,100 artificial satellites fly over the U.S., but several companies, Google, Facebook, SpaceX, OneWeb, and Samsung, are planning to launch up to 4,600 new communication satellites, each by 2020, in order to blanket the entire planet with high-speed internet access. 6G is coming out now, too. In 1968, even the first small fleet of 28 military satellites precipitated a worldwide flu pandemic. Unlike a ground-based antenna, whose radiation is highly attenuated when it reaches the magnetosphere, satellites act directly on it through mechanisms that are still poorly understood, thus compromising life on Earth. We forget the warnings of Ross Addy, the grandfather of bioelectromagnetics, and of the atmospheric physicist Neil Cherry, that we are electrically regulated by the world surrounding us, and that the safe level of exposure to radio frequencies is therefore 0. This potentially catastrophic initiative must be opposed, and the organization leading the way is the Global Union Against Radiation Deployment from Space, or GARDS. The website will be in the description. In 2014, the physician Tetsuharu Shinjo published a before and after study. He evaluated the health of 122 inhabitants of a building on which base station antennas had been installed. 21 suffered from chronic fatigue, 14 from dizziness, or Meniere's disease, 14 from headaches, 17 from eye pain or infections, 14 from insomnia, and 10 from chronic nosebleeds. 5 months after the antennas were removed, only 2 cases of insomnia, 1 case of vertigo, and 1 case of headaches remained. Now there's your answer. This human rights emergency, which affects hundreds of millions of people on a planetary scale, and the environmental emergency that threatens the extinction of countless species of plants and animals, must be faced.
Who are you? 6748 Smith, W.
Where do you work?
In the Ministry of Truth.
Which department?
The Records Department.
What is your business in the people's area?
I had a headache. I thought if I got a little air.
When did you leave work?
1800 hours.
It's now 2200. Report tomorrow morning at 800 hours to Fort Administration.
Yes, indeed. The Electric Rainbow, parts 1 and 2. We're going to switch to part B soon. I'll be out in a Oh yeah, we're going to be moving on to Giants. I want to close this one down. Start part 2. And the first one is an hour-long audio called The Giants of Atlantis. That'll be coming right up. We'll come out and say hello in a minute.
Oh, hey, it's working.
What's wrong?
My mic.
Oh,
How about that?
yo, that's the cordless, man. Look how
All right.
professional that shit looks.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll tackle that later.
What,
Hey,
what was
everybody.
wrong? What'd you do? Have the volume off?
I don't know. I just switched channels. And it seems to work now. Hey, everybody. I'm going to come out and see you here.
Yo, man, if you holler at Valerie, tell her I love her and my phone's fucked up.
All right. I'll tell her that. Hi, Valerie. Greg just said his phone's messed up. How are you? How's everybody doing out there tonight? It's good to see everybody. Hi, Andy, Grouch, Ray, Strange Days, Sea of Chronos, Strange Days. Hey, it's good to see you always. Man, it's good to see everybody. Flame Bright Cheer. Strange Days has been around for a long time, hasn't he?
Yo, man, you still need my
Let's see.
flashlight?
Thank you, Strange.
Yo, you still
Oh,
need
you
my flashlight?
retracted it. No, I'm good. Yeah, we keep getting this Amber Alert. It says, Madison Heights, 6-year-old boy missing, brown hair, last seen. I don't know that street. If you have any info, I sure hope they find that little fella. He's probably scared to death. That's terrible. You ever get an Amber Alert on your cell phone? Well, you know, I saw that thing on Jimmy Dore, and it reminded me, thank you so much for saying I sound better. I'm not out of the woods yet, but I'm starting to walk, and hi, JK, and I got to put some weight on, and been getting some pretty good sleep, and hopefully I'll be able to read soon. That's my goal. I'm not ready just yet, but I'm getting there, and my tongue has settled down, and everything is getting back to normal. I'm doing this thing called, hold on, what is that? That's not supposed to be there. Oh, I got this studio shit up. Just get rid of this. And let's see, transition. There. I don't use that transition very often with the studio. Anyways, that should be going bye-bye. I don't understand. I'm not showing that. Why is that playing? This is just a weird ass thing, man. 1 minute it acts fine, the next minute it's not. It's weird. Anyways, that was going to be it for tonight. I see you got a lot of you in the house, and I like that. And I miss you when I don't get to talk to you. And thank you, Grouch. I sound better than before, huh? I guess I get a little bit better. Yeah, I know. I am a shadow of my former self. But I'm trying. Cancer is a hell of a thing. Man, if I could just get rid of all this congestion, and I'm having immunotherapy right now, and my lungs are clear, but I have a lot of congestion in my bronchial tubes. What do they call that? esophagus. It gets clogged up. I have to take, medicine for it. And I got a lot of anxiety. But I suppose that'll pass as I start to become a little bit more normal. Yeah. Yeah, it's just not quite there yet. But we're getting there. It's better than it was, I'll tell you that. I listened to a couple of last things and it was terrible. But I'm willing to hang out for a little longer if you guys want to. Just tell me what you want to hear. You want to hear some Velikovsky? You want to hear some giant stuff? Thank you so much, Strange. I love you. And I love all of you guys. Strange, you've been around a long time. It's time to give you a promotion. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Noogie Blue. And you guys, I just love each and every one of you. And I got a couple of donations, which I'm not used to. I don't get a lot. And one was Scott James. I appreciate so much. And the other person, I'm going to have to go to PayPal and write it down. Plus, I had my wonderful 5 patrons that I need to give credit to. So my next video that drop, I'll make sure I give proper credit for all of you guys. And I found some really interesting stuff going through walls, all this stuff, and thank you. Happy New Year to you too. And I found a lot of good stuff to read. So as soon as my voice is on the heel, good enough to read, to where you can tolerate it, then I'm going to be back reading again. And yeah, but it's something, isn't it? All the stuff they've been found. I was really intrigued by that video that Neil did with Shockwave on that possibility that there was a Sahara culture, very high tech, that got buried by tons of sand from Mars' northern hemisphere. I really thought, that sounds good, I'll do that, fine. Actually, I'll try that. I need to get some ginger, but I have honey and lemon. And once I get rid of that, I'll be okay. Really starting to feel better. Well, I had tongue cancer, and they gave me radiation, and it killed the tumor, but it made my tongue swell up like big time, and then it spread to my lungs because I waited so long. And the last PET test I had, it came out clear. So they're telling me that I'm going to get a second chance. And right now, with going through the immunotherapy, they don't just give that to anyone. They give that to people who think they're going to survive. And I'm very, very lucky. And it's a good Lord. I pray every day. I believe in God. And I just, yeah, it's okay, just, I don't know, when you brush your teeth, make sure you brush your tongue. It's very important. I never did. I never thought about that. Yes, I tried fenbendazole, I tried ivermectin. I tried B17, which is apricot seeds. I tried food grade hydrogen peroxide. I tried it all. And when the tumor started to, I scraped my tongue a lot. When the tumor started to turn into a second head, then I knew I had to go to the ER. And that's when the regular, I had the technology, it's come a long ways, but I had to go through the radiation, chemo, and all that. My hair all fell out. It was terrible. But I made it through all that. And then they told me I was clear. They wanted me to have immunotherapy. And one of the side effects of immunotherapy is flu-like symptoms. Well, I don't know if it was flu-like symptoms or if I really had the flu, but it was just terrible. And I've been fighting that for like the last month. And it's hard to believe you had the flu for a month. But been going through the Mucinex and all that. It's caused a lot of high anxiety. But, I always try to get in a broadcast whenever I can or drop a video, because I don't want to leave you guys hanging. And one day I'm going to be back. I'll be 100%, and we can move on. And I can't wait till that day comes. I'm really sorry to hear that I'm broken. Yeah, I know. But the radiation did kill the tumor. I guess the object is that hopefully it'll kill the tumor before it kills the host, because I'm still having ramifications from the radiation. That was really hard on my body. And then I had to go through chemo, which kills everything, But I've still coming through. I'm still alive. And a couple of times I had to spend 6 days in the hospital. And I want to thank you so much, Unbroken. It's beautiful. It's really brought me close to God. And I praise every day that I'm above ground, that I have to spend with you and my family and just be here. And what I was going to say about the donations, you guys couldn't have came through at a better moment. I'm spending so much money on medicine and shit. It's ridiculous. But it came through so quick, so at the right time. And God, I love you guys. I really do. I want to show something else before I say goodnight. So we'll do this little video here. I got it queued up anyway. And let's see where it is. It's on the antediluvians. Doesn't have a lot to do with what we were talking about. But for Patreon, I did get a new book. It's The Electric Body, Electric Health. I'm going to be starting to play that in Patreon, just so you know. And everything, as you know, is electric. Everything. So, we are blessed. We are blessed to be alive at this time. Hi, Frank. I see you, buddy. And haven't forgotten your Jeopardy. I've just been taking the long way around that barn. But I promise to deliver. I will. And, alright, well, I'm going to show this last video here. And then I'll say goodnight. Hi, I just wanted to tell you that you mean the world to me. And I love you so much. Okay. Alright, I'll talk to you a little bit later. This is supernova, quasars, and moon worship. Oh, here we go. Pre-Adamite age. We'll play that. Alright, and I'll see you in a little bit. It's for you. Can't say I love you enough.
An ancient tradition described the establishment of moon worship to Adam, the first man. The medieval Arab scholar Abu Bakr wrote, "They, the Sabians, say that Adam was born from male and female, just like the rest of mankind. But they honored him greatly and said that he had come from the moon, that he was the prophet and apostle of the moon, and that he had exhorted the nations that they should serve the moon. They also related about Adam that when he had left the moon and proceeded from the area of India towards Babylonia, that he brought many wonders with him. The Adamites, the antediluvian men, were most probably not the first human beings on the planet, even admitting that by expulsion from the Garden of Eden is allegorized a catastrophe which quite destroyed mankind prior to the deluge. It is impossible to declare that it was the first catastrophe. It depends on the memory of the peoples which catastrophe they consider as the act of creation. Human beings, rising from some catastrophe, bereft of memory of what had happened, regarded themselves as created from the dust of the earth. All knowledge about the ancestors, who they were, and in what interstellar space they lived, was wiped away from the memory of the few survivors. The Talmudic rabbinical tradition believes that before Adam was created, the world was more than once inhabited and more than once destroyed. It was at the end of the first age, symbolized by the expulsion of man from the blessed Garden of Eden, that the moon lost its brightness. It was not just a single human pair. The tradition ascribes to Adam the invention of 70 languages. Hebrew mythology assigns to the period preceding Adam's expulsion different geophysical and biological conditions. The sun shone prominently on the earth, and the Garden of Eden, placed in the east, was, it must be conceived, under perpetual rays of the dawn. The earth was not watered by rain, but mist, ascending from the ground, condensed as dew upon the leaves. The plants looked only to the earth for nourishment. Man was of exceedingly great stature. The dimensions of man's body were gigantic. His appearance was unlike that of later man. His body was overlaid with a horny skin. But a day came, and the celestial illumination ceased. The sun had grown dark the instant Adam became guilty of disobedience. The flames of the ever-turning sword terrified Adam. Genesis 3:24. In another legend it is told that the celestial light shone a little in the darkness, and then a celestial light ceased, to the consternation of Adam. The illumination of the first period never returned. The sky that man was used to see never appeared before him again. The firmament is not the same as the heavens of the first day. The day of Genesis, as I have already noted, is said to be equal to 1,000 years. It was after the fall of man, according to Hebrew tradition, that the sun set for the first time. The first time Adam witnessed the sinking of the sun, he was seized with anxious fears. All the night he spent in tears. When day began to dawn, he understood that what he had deplored was but the course of nature. It was also then the seasons began. That's pretty good lyrics. This is told in the following story. Adam noticed that the days were growing shorter and feared lest the world be darkened. But after the winter solstice, he saw that the days grew longer again. The earth also underwent changes, independent before. She was hereafter to wait to be watered by the rain from above. The variety of species diminished. Man, according to Hebrew legends, decreased in size. There was a vast difference between his later and his former state, between his supernatural size then and his shrunken size now. He also lost his horny skin. The whole of nature altered its ways. References:
Athanasius Kircher, Taurus Babelsai Varkonatologia, Amsterdam, 1679, p. 134. The very angels and the celestial beings were grieved by the transgression of Adam. The moon alone laughed, wherefore God obscured her light. Ginsberg Legends I, 80. Ginsberg Legends I,
79 and Ginsberg Legends 76. Worship of the moon. Because of its size, and also because of the events which accompanied the first appearance of the moon, many ancient peoples regarded the moon as the chief of two luminaries. The sun was of smaller importance than the moon in the eyes of the Babylonian astrologers. The Assyrians and the Chaldeans referred to the time of the moon god as the oldest period in the memory of the people, before other planetary gods came to dominate the world ages. The moon was a supreme deity. Such references are found in the inscriptions of Sargon II, circa 720 BC, and
Nabonidus,
circa 550 BC. The Babylonian Sin, the moon, was a very ancient deity. Mount Sinai owes its name to Sin. The moon, appearing as a body larger than the sun, was endowed by the imagination of the peoples with a masculine role, while the sun was assigned a feminine role. Many languages reserved a masculine name for the moon. It was probably when the moon was removed to a greater distance from the earth and became smaller to observers on the earth that another name, usually feminine, came to designate the moon in most languages. Bezold in Baal was considered to be the father of the sun god Shamash, Utu, and was commonly addressed as Father Sin, Sumerian and Babylonian. Psalms 1909. F. Kumant noted the prominence of Sin in the earliest historical period in Babylonia and found it remarkable that at first the primacy was assigned to the moon. Astrology and Religion Among the Greeks and Romans, page 124. The late Assyrio-Babylonian cult of the moon. According to the Dabistan, a Persian work of early Islamic times, the Kaaba of Mecca was originally dedicated to the worship of the moon. On moon worship, among the ancient Arabs, also
Touch Sinaitische Inschriften Zeitschrift des Deutsches Morgenländisches Gesellschaft 3, 1849, p. 202, and Oshanda Vorweilemische Religion der Araber Ibid 7, 1853, p. 483. Cf. I. Golddigger, Mythology Among the Hebrews and its Historical Development, 1877.
The Greeks regarded the moon as of greater importance than the sun. The sun's subordination to the moon is a remarkable feature of early Greek myth. Helios was not even an Olympian, but a mere Titan's son, Hyperion's. And this is a long one. C.R. Markham, London, 1873, describes sacrifices to the moon by the natives of Peru in the 16th century. Also, the Indians of Vancouver Island assigned greater importance to the moon than the sun. E.B. Taylor, Primitive Culture, 1929, as did several tribes in Brazil. See Sargon's display inscription, since distant days of the age of Nanaru. A cuneiform text describes the first appearance of the moon, when the gods fixed the crescent of the moon to cause the new moon to shine forth, to create the month, the new moon, which was created in heaven, with the majesty in the midst of heaven arose. R.W. Rogers, Cuneiform Parallels of the Old Testament, 1912. J. Louis, The Late Assyrio-Babylonian Cult of the Moon and Its Culmination in the Time of Nabonidus, quotes Philochorus as having Macrobius Saturnalia 8, quotes Philochorus as having said that men offer sacrifices to the moon, dressed as women, and women dressed as men, because the moon is thought to be both male and female. Macrobius was quite the author. I think I want to get some of his works. They look fascinating to me. To read something someone wrote thousands of years ago that's been dead for that long, that he can talk to you right in this book, to just you. That's what's great about books. Is that where we get the word microbe from, or macro, or both? I don't know, I'm just guessing. You know, I noticed on the video of mine, Worship of Saturn, if I'm not mistaken, that is claiming that Osiris was swathed to look like Saturn, and therefore all the dead were to be swathed like that. And that's where we get the mummy. So they were emulating Saturn's look. And it does look like it's been wrapped in bandages. It's very interesting. And that pretty much cinches it. They had to have seen it. How else would they know? Oh, a little side note, I got this picture from Ted Holden and this video right here. And that sure looks like a little girl to me. If this is truly a picture from the Mars rover, then humans are definitely on Mars. And here's the before and after pictures. She's there, and then at some point later, she's gone. That is very telling. I've always said I need to see that one picture that puts it over the top and makes it impossible to deny. And this picture, for me, is that picture. In 2016, I took up painting. It's something that I always wanted to do, I just never did. I got a couple of interesting pictures here. Now, I'm a lousy artist, so I'm not trying to show it off. I'm just showing a strange coincidence. I painted this picture right here, not knowing at all that water was there for one, and that Thoth was synonymous with the moon. I did not know that at the time, and that people apparently or supposedly, allegedly came from the moon. See, I have an embryo there inside the moon. That's what I was trying to make it look like anyway. I know my artist work is lousy, but I was just a beginner. I'm still a beginner, but it's something I really enjoy. And the strangest one of all, now don't look at my lousy galaxy. I was experimenting with sponges. I tried to make a galaxy with sponges. And it's not the galaxy that's interesting. I snapped a picture of it to play with the contrast. And look at this. You see that face right there? That's creepy. I don't know if that could be a coincidence. Did I capture some creature? It's pretty freaky. Well, I just can't see it being a coincidence of light and shadow. I don't know. It's not in the painting. It's just in the photograph. It came from the flash. Whoever he is, he looks like he's got a mustache and he's sore.
People that work for NASA, most of them, 99% of them, are completely oblivious.
Yeah.
They're like I was back when I worked for Cronkite. I couldn't imagine there'd been a hidden agenda for NASA then. If you told me, I would have said, "Oh, come on, you're nuts."
Yeah.
But some of those people, a percentage, they have figured it out.
Yep. And they are reading your books.
And well, maybe they are. Maybe they've just figured it out on their own. But what they've done that we have found is they have left clues going back to the Apollo era in the Apollo data, like in the film. Remember I talked about the DAC camera films?
Yeah.
They hid messages for us in the splicings between the films. Coded messages left by NASA people in 1969, 1970.
Give a shout, special thanks to Todd Borneman for your generous donation. I don't get many. Thanks for helping the cause. The Earth without the moon.
It's the last one. I'm gonna say that.
period when the earth was moonless, is probably the most remote recollection of mankind. Democritus, Anaxagoras, taught that there was a time when the earth was without the moon. Aristotle wrote that Arcadia in Greece, before being inhabited by the Hellenes, had a population of Pelasgians, and that these aborigines occupied the land already before there was a moon in the sky above the earth. For this reason, they were called Proselines. Apollonius of Rhodes mentioned the time when not all orbs were yet in the heavens, before the Danaan and Deucalion races came into existence, and only the Arcadians lived, of whom it is said that they dwelt on the mountains and fed on acorns before there was a moon. Plutarch wrote, in Roman Questions, there were Arcadians of Evander's following, the so-called pre-lunar people. Similarly, wrote Ovid, the Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Jove, and the folk is older than the moon. Hippolytus refers to a legend that Arcadia brought forth Peliscus, of greater antiquity than the moon. Lucian, in his Astrology, says that the Arcadians affirm in their folly that they are older than the moon. Censorinus also alludes to the time in the past when there was no moon in the sky. Some allusions to the time before there was a moon may be found also in the Scriptures. In Job 25:5, the grandeur of the Lord who makes peace in the heights is praised, and the time is mentioned before there was a moon. And it did not shine. Also in Psalm 72:5 it is said, Thou wasn't feared since the time of the sun and before the time of the moon, a generation of generations. A generation of generations means a very long time. Of course, it is of no use to counter this psalm with the myth of the first chapter of Genesis, a tale brought down from exotic and later sources. The memory of a world without a moon lives in oral tradition among the Indians. The Indians of Bogota, highlands in the eastern Cordilleras of Colombia relate some of their tribal reminiscences to the time before there was a moon. In the earliest times, when the moon was not yet in the heavens, say the tribesmen of the Chibchas, there are currently 3 theories of the origin of the moon. 1. The moon originated at the same time as the earth, being formed substantially from the same material, aggregated and solidifying. 2. Was formed not in the vicinity of the earth, but in a different part of the solar system, and was later captured by the earth. 3. The moon was originally a portion of the terrestrial crust, and was torn out, leaving behind the bed of the Pacific. All 3 theories claim the presence of the moon on an orbit around the earth for billions of years. Mythology may supply each of these views with some support. Genesis 1, for the first view. The birth of Aphrodite from the sea, for the third view. Aphrodite's origin in the disruption of Uranus, and also the violence of sin, the Babylonian moon, seems to support the second view. Since mankind on both sides of the Atlantic preserved the memory of a time when the earth was without a moon, the first hypothesis, namely of the moon originating simultaneously with the earth and in its vicinity, is to be excluded, leaving the other 2 hypotheses to compete between themselves. We have seen that the traditions of diverse peoples offer corroborative testimony to the effect that in a very early age, but still in the memory of mankind, No moon accompanied the Earth. Since human beings already peopled the Earth, it is improbable that the moon sprang from it. There must have existed a solid lithosphere, not a liquid Earth. Thus, while I do not claim to know the origin of the moon, I find it more probable that the moon was captured by the Earth. Such an event would have occurred as a catastrophe. If the moon's formation took place away from the Earth, its composition may be quite different. There is no evidence to suggest whether the moon was a planet, a satellite of another planet, or a comet at the time of its capture by the Earth. Whatever atmosphere it may have had was pulled away by the Earth, by other contacting bodies, or dissipated in some other way. Since the time the moon began to accompany the Earth, it underwent the influence of contacts with comets and planets that passed near the Earth in subsequent ages. The mass of the moon being less than that of the Earth, the moon must have suffered greater disturbances in cosmic contacts. During these contacts, the moon was not carried away. This is due to the fact that no body more powerful than the Earth came sufficiently close to the moon to take it away from the Earth for good. But in the contacts that took place, the moon was removed repeatedly from one orbit to another. The variations in the position of the moon can be read in the variations in the length of the month. The length of the month repeatedly changed in subsequent catastrophic events. And for this, there exists a large amount of supporting evidence. In these later occurrences, the moon played a passive role, and Zeus in the Iliad advised it, Aphrodite, to stay out of the battle in which Athena and Ares, Venus and Mars, that I pronounced wrong for the whole video, were the main contestants. What I'm thinking is when Earth was a satellite of Saturn, of course, the moon probably wasn't, there was a time when it wasn't with the Earth, maybe not even with the planets. And it sounds like there might have been a time when the moon was very close to the Earth and still molten, which if that was the case for a while, it could have acted as the big masculine body that was observed in the last episode. So that's a possibility, and the Earth captured the moon, like it said, and it slowly receded, or something maybe pulled it. There's so many things that could have happened, but delving down into it and trying to figure it out is fascinating. All right, references.
Hippolytus, Refutatio Omnium Heresium VE. Aristotle FR, 591 ed. V.
Plutarch, Moralia, translated by F.C. Babbitt, section 76.
Fasti, translated by Sir J. Fraser, 290. Refutatio Omnium Heresium VE.
Lucian Astrology, translated by A.M. Harmon, 1936.
Liber de Di Natali 19, also Scholium on Aristophanes' Clouds, line 398. Ed von Humboldt, VUEs Des. Cordy years 1816, English translate researches concerning the institutions and monuments of the ancient inhabitants of America, 1814, Volume 1, p. 87, cf. H. Fisher, in Modern World, 1930.
In addition to the sources cited above, the Nihongi Chronicles of Japan transactions proceeding on the Japanese society, which recount how heaven and earth produced the moon god. The Kalevala of the Fens recalls a time when the moon was placed in orbit.
Cf. The effects of such an event on the Earth's rotation calculated by H. Gerstenkorn in Zeitschrift für Astrophysik 36, 1955, p. 245. Arrhenius.
Two alternatives for the history of the moon. Science 165, 1969.
Just a thought, play on words. When the moon first appeared, the Israelites called it sin, and it would appear over the Agag mountains. Thus we get the word synagogue, which is where they worship. And I wonder, since they say Adam came from the moon, did the moon bring sin to the earth with it? Just something I thought I'd put out there. Crossed my mind.
S.F. Singer and L.W. Banderman. Where was the moon formed? Science, 1970. The moon was formed independently of the Earth and later captured, presumably by a three-body interaction, and these events were followed by the dissipation of the excess energy through tidal friction in a close encounter. More recently, a study of lunar paleotides has shown that the moon could not have been formed in orbit around the Earth. A.J. Anderson, Lunar Paleotides and the Origin of the Earth-Moon System. The Moon and the Planets, 1978. Because of a certain degree of instability in the Sun-Earth-Moon system, the planetary origin and capture of the Moon by the Earth becomes a strong dynamic possibility. R. Mackenzie and Sebehe. Forget it. Stability of the Sun-Earth-Moon system. The Astronomical Journal, 1977.
Cf. U. B. Cherniak on recent lunar atmosphere, Nature, 273, the 15th of June, 1978, pp.
497. The author found strong theoretical evidence of a considerable atmosphere on the moon during the greater part of its history. Yeah, I remember reading about that before. I think it's trying to grow one now. Wow, that was a longer reference than the article. I always found it odd that the Earth had this, it was this planet of beautiful color with an atmosphere and water, and the moon, which is in the sun's comfort zone too, so-called, is barren and dead. I never quite got that. If we were both in the same place at the same time, we should look similar. I like going through the references.
That's going to do it for me, folks.
Astronomical knowledge before the deluge. A civilization was destroyed, the real value of which is incalculable. Hebrew tradition estimates that the population of the antediluvial world amounted to millions. Adam is said to have invented 70 languages. Cain, his son, built cities and monuments, and ruled over kings. They were representatives of generations. According to Hebrew legends, the deluge and its time had already been predicted by Enoch, and even more ancient generations were astronomical calculations predicting the catastrophe. This might have been the knowledge of months and of years and periods of comets that the remote generations had acquired. It was in this celestial harmony and disharmony that the secrets of the upheavals were conceived to lie. The science about the times to which the calamity could return and fall on our earth was cultivated among populations. They had a vivid remembrance of days of misfortune or of lucky escape. It is told about the children of Seth, the son of Adam, that they were the inventors of that peculiar sort of wisdom which is concerned with the heavenly bodies and their order, that their inventions were not lost before they were sufficiently known. They made 2 pillars upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed, at one time by the force of fire, and on another time by the quantity of water. One was of brick, the other of stone, and they inscribed their discoveries for all the 243 years during which the influence of Enoch prevailed. In the story of Enoch's ascension, it is said that he predicted the disaster. Enoch was driven into the sky by a fiery chariot driven by fiery chargers. That's interesting. The days thereafter, the kings who had turned back sent messengers to inquire into the fate of the men who had refused to separate themselves from Enoch, for they had noted the number of them. They found stone and great hailstones in the spot from where Enoch had risen. What was that all about? When they removed the stones, they discovered all of the bodies who had remained with Enoch. He alone was not among them. He was high in heaven. What the Agata means to tell is that a human being, and one gifted with the greatest wisdom concerning the heavenly bodies and their order, was brought away in a fiery storm which killed many, brought snow and meteorites, and which had been predicted by the one who disappeared. Some exact knowledge of the revolution of the bodies in the sky is ascribed here to the antediluvian generations. It is said that the real period of grace endured not for 7 days, but for 120 years. During this time, the flood was over mankind as a threat. Sanhedrin 108b. Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews 2:8, borrowed by Yasher Bereshit.
Genesis 5:24.
Live in Hernando, Mississippi, where there's been spottings of a cougar and away from where a local man rolled his cell phone video on what some say is a cougar. Right back with a lot of reports.
Look at this picture here of the face on Mars, the left side. What does that look like to you? Kind of looks like a lizard to me. You see the lizard eye there, the slit? That's digital. And then they switch it over to analog and you get this. It's kind of weird.
Good night, brothers and sisters. Lots of love. Happy February. We'll be out of this soon.